This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love to work alone. Hey, welcome everybody. This is Your Own Best Company, and this is a podcast for people who love working alone. And my name is Franklin Taggart, and this was my idea. I'm really delighted today to introduce you to Alan Heymann. Alan has a knack for coaching fellow introverts, helping them find their superpowers in an extroverted world. Alan also specializes in coaching through transitions, such as the transition from individual contributor to leader, the transition into a larger and more complex role, or the transition into a different career. He brings a warm, open, and energetic presence to his coaching clients. To date, Alan has coached leaders who were born in 19 countries and work on 5 continents. He's also the author of the book, Don't Just Have the Soup, 52 Analogies for Leadership, Coaching, and Life. An expert communicator and engaging speaker, Alan spent more than 2 decades in public, government, and nonprofit communications, leading teams from 2 to more than 100 people who use words and images to inspire positive change in society. Inspired by a career transformation he brought about with the support of an executive coach, Alan decided to become a coach himself. He founded Peaceful Direction in April 2019. I'm just delighted to welcome you to the podcast, Alan. And how are things going out there in the DC area?
Things are going pretty well, Franklin. Thank you so much for having me and letting me share some time with your audience today. It's a new year, and in many ways, it's maybe a continuation of the last 2 years we've also had.
Yeah, some of this feels like the same story, right?
Indeed.
Well, I think we're finding a new way. Maybe we'll find some new ways of being together that will last out of all of this. I'm really curious. You do work a lot with introverts who are kind of working into an extrovert's world, and I'm a little bit curious for your own self personally. How have you seen that play out in your own life and career, as someone who identifies themselves as an introvert? Where do you see the tension?
I think the short answer to your question is probably by making a bunch of mistakes and learning from them, honestly. That's, kind of the nature of life. But I am a big believer in learning and growth, and I started my career as a television reporter. So the shy, somewhat reserved young person that I was, I forced myself to get in front of strangers and talk to them for a living. And it was not comfortable at times, but I understood, kind of the nature of it and the importance of it. And while I didn't have the terminology at the time, didn't really know the distinction between introvert, extrovert, I knew there was a difference. And to me, an operative difference of that today is that there can be introverts who like being around people. There can be introverts who like public speaking, who like being on television, who like having an audience. Introverts with an ego, you might call it. And the difference is, where do you get your energy from? So Here's how I would illustrate that. I love going to prior to the pandemic, loved going to conferences and giving talks about various things. I did it for years, even before I became a coach. So I am the person who's going to go be carefully prepared, who's going to be nervous before getting up there, who's going to do a competent job of delivering the workshop, catch the applause, feel great about it, and immediately go back to my hotel room to recharge. Versus, I had a legendary extrovert boss once upon a time who would take every business card, shake every hand, and you had to claw him out of the room to his next appointment. So to me, it's all about where you get your energy from. And I find that solitude is so nourishing for me that I really notice the difference on days where I don't have a lot of it. And that has been key as a self-employed person to managing my energy and understanding what I need on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely. I think the majority of people who listen to this particular podcast would identify themselves very similarly to what you've described. I am one of those introverts who looks like an extrovert in the world because I tend to be pretty out there in public, and I'm fairly visible. And a lot of times when people find out that I'm an introvert, they're actually kind of surprised by that. But I think the other thing is that I think people have some assumptions about introverts that I question the validity of, one of them being that introverts are shy people, and that's not true at all. Talk to me a little bit about in your own experience of being so publicly available and visible. What were some of the assumptions that people made about you that just weren't on track at all?
That I would perhaps be the life of the party in any given situation.
Yeah.
That I would always know what to say. That I would always want to be social. So one of the interesting things about my very brief television career, I was in it for all of 3.5 years, was that I was a very young person when I did it. I was straight out of college, and I was around a number of people who were journalists in the Capitol Press Corps in Springfield, Illinois, who were all about the same age. Many of them had come out of the same graduate reporting program I did not, but many of them came out around the same time I was starting my work there. And so there was always this assumption, we're always going to go out to the bars after we're done being on the air or turning in our copy for deadline. Sometimes, honestly, I just didn't feel like it, but I didn't know why at the time. I didn't know why I would, come back from an evening of being social and feel more drained than I was when I started. So that was a learning process over time. And like you're saying earlier, there are assumptions that people make about, those who are known to be introverts also, on the flip side of that we're going to be misanthropic, that we're going to be antisocial. And I derive great joy from being with people. I do it for a living. It's my job. It's literally my job. Like many things that give us life, we have to recharge and recover. So that's where I'm going to be reading a book for a little while, or working on a jigsaw puzzle, or listening to a podcast, perhaps after a long day of Zoom calls with my clients.
The way that I've talked to people about it is that I talk to them more about sensory stimulation being the thing that I need to be more aware of than even interaction is concerned. Because it's not so much the people that drain me, it's being in situations where my senses are overloaded, and that's where I really feel it. I don't know. Do you find a similarity there?
I do in some ways, and it is very context dependent. So I love live music. I know you're a musician, and being in a live musical environment that's loud and full of people, and just that is a lot on the senses, but that also gives me life. Last weekend, I was in a grocery store that was more crowded than it typically is for a Saturday afternoon, and I had my wife and daughter both with me, which was unusual. Usually it's just one or the other. And I got to a point where, they're bringing items to my, should we get this? Should we get that? It's not on the list. I got to follow my list, and there's all these people, and it was too much. And so I kind of realized my cup was full at that point, and it was getting to be about time to leave the store before we had some sort of a bigger issue. So we got to the car. I was able to, take some breaths and kind of come back to myself, and it was fine for the rest of the afternoon. But my senses were definitely pushing toward overload, and the warning signs were definitely there.
What are the warning signs for you?
I find myself having a very heightened state of awareness that I can't quite turn off.
Yeah.
I find myself unable to be rational as I typically am. I'm a rather rational person, in the sense that if I'm trying to choose between two different kinds of peanut butter in that moment, the brain can't process it, and that is a sign, because that's the sort of thing that I usually have no trouble with at all.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned live music, and what's really funny is that if I'm not on stage, I'm generally somewhere with my back to the wall, and usually it's back by the sound booth because there's less traffic back there.
Okay. So you found a way to experience that still, makes it meaningful.
Yeah, I can't be in the crowd. If I'm in the crowd, I'll freak out. I won't enjoy it at all. But if I have my back against the wall, the other option though, the other place that I found that I'm really, really comfortable is right at the foot of the stage, where I can interact with the performers, but I don't, and everybody else in the room is behind me. I can tolerate that. But wow, there have been so many times where I've been on a show. I'm thinking of one at the 930 Club where I was on the floor, and it was a Slicky Boys show. It was a reunion show for the Slicky Boys, who were like a big kind of well-known DC band. it was jam packed. And I've never had a sense of almost a panic attack in a crowd until that night. And I just thought, I have to find an exit, and I have to find it now. But that sensation that you described at the grocery store is one that I have experienced as well. It's like I go to the grocery store on Tuesday mornings, usually between 10 o'clock and 10:30. Anytime outside of that, and it's just way too many people.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you know that about yourself. And also, I was reflecting on this earlier on in the pandemic when things seemed like they were starting to open up for a little while, and how that was awkward for a lot of people. That was uncomfortable for a lot of people. And talking them through that, either because they were my clients or people I knew well, we spent the better part of a year at that point feeling deeply as though being around large groups of other people could actually kill us. And that's not something that you just unwind overnight. So I imagine if you're dealing with, sensory overstimulation, if you're dealing with social anxiety or some combination of both of those things, this has to be a pretty tricky time.
I've heard that from a lot of people. And what's really interesting to me is that I've heard that actually from some people who were pretty, they're definitely extrovert on the Myers-Briggs scale.
Yeah.
And they're just saying, that they're more aware of crowds. They're more aware of movement. They're more aware of all of that stuff than they've ever been, and they're more sensitive to it.
Yes.
And I'm just saying, well, welcome to my world.
Yeah, the armchair biologist in me wonders if perhaps we've awakened something that in past generations of our species has kept us from harm.
That's a good question. I wonder the same. That's an intriguing direction that I'm bringing. I'm going to probably have to go somewhere with that after we get done.
Let me know how it goes.
I will. Well, Alan, talk to me a little bit about who were the clients that you work with, and what roles are they in, and what are the things that you help them with?
Yeah, in my private practice, I have worked with people from, just individual contributor barely emerging into leadership all the way up to chief executives of organizations. And a couple of common themes, as you mentioned when you read out my bio, are one, yes, absolutely fellow introverts, or people who are maybe introvert to the middle of the scale. There are wonderful coaches out there who I've had the pleasure of working with, and so I know that I'm definitely not the coach for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's been a pleasure to refer prospective clients to other coaches if there's a better fit there. So what I'll say is that if you're in the presence of a leader who just knocks you over with their personality on first encounter and has trouble dialing it back, typically those are not my clients.
Yeah. So
I tend to dwell on the folks who are more reserved, the ones who want to step it forward a bit, who want to take more credit, who want to be more visible. So that's one area. And the other area that you also mentioned is transitions. And so we are in a great period of transition in the entire economy at the moment. Everybody's moving around all over the place. And the common denominator for me has been that folks have really been able to focus on what's important to them and what they've decided they simply just don't want to tolerate anymore as part of their work experience. So I get the career changers. I get the person who's been in the same job for 2 decades and decides it's time to make a change and just needs a place to start.
Yeah.
I certified with Dave Evans and Bill Burnett of the Stanford Designing Your Life lab last fall. So I'm a Designing Your Life certified coach. I'm bringing that work this year into the transitions that I'm working with my clients on, and it's been fascinating. It's very meaningful. You don't guarantee results, but they've been able to make some incredible progress and end up in some pretty interesting places as a result.
Do you have any stories that stand out as favorites?
Besides the person who actually did quit his job after 2 decades, without having done much on LinkedIn, without having put the resume together, but simply for deciding that it's time. I've had a client who successfully renegotiated an employment contract as the head of a large government agency recently. I have had folks who are really understanding what they're capable of and what they're interested in as a result of this process, never having asked themselves those questions before. So I'm hearing a lot of fascinating stories about values being out of alignment with the organizations where they're working in, or not seeing eye to eye with the boss anymore. And I just kind of get to take it all in and, see where it ends up without necessarily being too attached to the outcome, but always being pleasantly surprised when I hear how it turns out.
Tell me a little bit about, as a person who you work alone, it's all on you.
Yes.
How do you develop your business?
In a number of different ways. One is that I do a fair amount of coaching contract work. So there are large coaching providers that engage coaches as contractors, and I work for a few of those, which is great for a number of reasons. One, it's a good baseline to build a business on. Two, it's work you don't have to go out and get because they have the client relationships and kind of match you up. And three, you meet some awfully fascinating other coaches through that kind of work. So I've been very fortunate to be engaged in a few of those different situations, either collaborating directly with a company client or just hanging around in Slack channels and doing book clubs and listening to podcasts together and referring business to each other on the private side of our practices. So the contract work has been very fruitful for me. And on the private side of my practice, at the moment, the number one contributor that I have is word of mouth and referrals.
Okay.
This is deeply personal work that we do.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to speak for any other coach as far as how they generate business, but I will tell you that I get contacted probably half a dozen times a week or more on LinkedIn by somebody offering to sell me leads or to help me convert better or to double the size of my business. And I'm not interested. It feels very inauthentic to me. This work is very personal in a sense that I feel like it's more aligned with me as a person than anything I've done professionally. And so I'm putting myself out there in a way that I don't think would work very well if I'm cold calling people or if I'm, having a dozen conversations with strangers a week and hoping that one of them will lead to closing a sale. So I will say that typically it's somebody who knows me and has worked with me before, and somebody they know comes my way.
Yeah.
And by the time we do end up having that conversation, I've taken in an intake survey. I've done a little bit of LinkedIn research, maybe talked to a few other folks, and we have a coaching conversation in that first call. And it's not a sales pitch, and it's not a what I can do for you. It's tell me what's going on, and then tell me what the experience was like having this conversation with me for a few minutes, and how does that feel? And if that's something you could see yourself going on with for 6 or 9 or 12 hours on Zoom, where you're going to talk pretty openly and pretty confidentially with somebody, that's your coach.
Yeah.
And if that's not me, it's going to be somebody else. And wouldn't it be great if it's somebody else that I know and can make a referral there?
Who are some of the coaches that you really look to as role models?
It's great that we have this generosity in the coach community, and there is no shortage of technique that you can lean on or inspiration or wisdom. I went to Georgetown University's coaching program, and there are hundreds of us alumni. We have a very active listserv. So, if somebody needs an invoice template or an HBR article about executive presence, you get it within seconds.
Yeah.
And so I admire a lot of the folks who have walked this path before me, and people whose practices are more mature and who have even greater connections and even greater experiences. The ones who have been doing it for, 10, 15, 20 years to my just a handful.
Yeah.
I would hesitate to name a bunch of them for fear of leaving a couple out. But I've had great success with just saying, can we chat for 15 or 20 minutes so I can get the benefit of your experience? And honestly, the way this business has been going for me so far and how much I'm enjoying it and how it seems to be growing year over year, I would really look forward to doing that someday for folks who are just coming up as well.
You touched on a little bit about how the pandemic was affecting people in terms of their relationship with their work. Yeah. How has it impacted yours?
I love the question because there's absolutely no way I can answer it. And let me tell you why. So when I started my business in April of 2019, I was working full time. So I was coaching clients at night, on weekends a little bit, during lunch breaks. In November of 2019 is when I left my last full-time job to focus full-time on my practice, which was exactly 4 months before the pandemic hit. So what I don't have is a baseline year pre or post-pandemic.
Yeah.
The first full year of my business was 2020. First year of my business actually went way better than I thought it was going to go, which is terrific. And 2021 was even stronger.
Yeah.
But what I can't answer for lack of a baseline was that because of the pandemic, despite the pandemic, or it had no impact whatsoever? All I can tell you is it's going well, and you can imagine people have no shortage of things to talk about these days, which could be why the business is keeping me as busy as it is.
Yeah, very true. I mean, you mentioned the people who are, really asking the deeper questions about their work and about how they're spending their time.
Yeah.
I feel like that, there's been no shortage on my end of opportunity since the pandemic started. I certainly don't have to work so hard to find people.
It's true. And I wonder about what we're going to take away from this whole experience once it actually ends, because my answer to that question has changed as we've progressed through this journey together.
Yeah.
I still do very much have hope for the idea that we will continue to see our leaders and our colleagues as complete human beings at work. This started with the notion that I was just all of a sudden seeing guest bedrooms and cats and dogs and children and spouses and piles of laundry in my Zoom calls with my clients.
Yeah.
And it was harder to separate those things, which in one way is really tricky because you can't remove yourself from work if you're physically in the same environment that you're living in. On the other hand, we had to run off someplace to, chase after a child or take the dog for a walk or something, or go for a run in the middle of the day. These things weren't unheard of anymore.
Yeah.
So what I'm really hoping for is that the leaders of companies and organizations that are making these decisions now will not try to hurry a way back to the way things were before, because I don't think that's going to be possible in many ways. And it is the employers who are staying open and curious and flexible about things who seem to be having an easier time retaining their folks and saying, I don't have the answers because it's all unfolding, and we'll figure this out together if you'll stick with me, versus, the kind of thou shalt be back with the butts in seats 4 or 5 days a week, 40, 50, 60 hours.
Yeah.
That's not workable as much as it once was, if it ever was.
Let's talk a little bit about your book. The title itself just it makes me chuckle a little, but it also is intriguing. So tell us about the book itself. Where did the idea come from?
Absolutely. So, and by the way, I think this is the first podcast interview I'm doing on the subject of the book. So thank you for that opportunity. I started noticing that analogies were popping up in my coaching work a lot. And these would be analogies perhaps that a client would raise during a session as a way of illustrating something that was going on in their world. Or it would be something that would pop into my head on the fly as a means of reframing something that the client was giving me. And I noticed how powerful it was because it just helps you put things in terms that are very easy to grasp. One of the issues that I've had as I've trained and become a coach is there's a lot of theory around all of this, and there are a million models that you can throw up to help describe and understand what the client is going through. Those are useful. I have found it more useful to bring things down a couple of levels and make it just, simple and easy to understand. Because I'm a fairly literal person at times, and many of my clients can be as well. But this idea of analogies just kept standing out to me. And so I started to write them down. And I started to write them down and make them into blog posts with permission, of course, from the anonymized clients who brought them into my world if it was theirs. And I started to get a pretty good response to this. Like, oh, yeah, I could see how that works. And that's interesting. And I had a similar situation. Very first one that I wrote, and kind of the runner-up to the title of the book that didn't end up becoming the title, was the toothpaste decision, in which, you could imagine standing in front of a wall of toothpaste and being confronted with 90 times more information than you could possibly need to make a $3 decision, and really the importance of judging the magnitude of the decision and the potential consequences. So I asked a client once, is this a toothpaste decision or is this a home buying decision? And it was the aha.
Yeah.
So that was the first analogy that I wrote. And so I started collecting these things. I was writing a blog post once every week or 2 weeks, and I realized this could be a pretty interesting anthology here. What if I gathered 52 of them, one for every week of the calendar year, and I made it a book? I thought, okay, I'll do this. So I was writing and writing and writing. I gave myself a self-publishing, self-reported deadline of November or so. So I put myself on a writing schedule. My wife illustrated all the analogies. There's a fresh homemade illustration for each one of them. She's an art teacher. It's the first time we've collaborated on something professionally before, which was really neat.
Yeah.
And the soup analogy came from a coaching session that I had with a client who was struggling to get her employees to do what she wanted. And she just couldn't figure it out. She couldn't understand what the issue was. Am I not expressing myself clearly? Are they not understanding me? Are they unable to follow these instructions? As in, have I hired somebody who's not right for the job? And I said, imagine you're in a restaurant, and imagine that you have ordered a salad to go with your meal, and somebody brings you a bowl of soup. So now you have options. And you can say, I'm sorry, I actually asked for the salad. Or you can say, somebody made this soup in the kitchen. It was probably a lot of work. They took the trouble to pour it out and bring it to my table. I'll just have the soup. And she said, I would totally do that, and I hate soup. So that is where the soup analogy was born. She realized she wasn't being clear enough with her directs in terms of what she expected, and so they didn't have direction to follow properly. And she kind of resolved to strengthen that a bit and not just have the soup. So I was working with the designer on the cover, and this is somebody that I've worked with for many years on a variety of different projects across a couple of different jobs. And we were going back and forth on the particulars of the configuration of the file for the cover. And he needed artwork because the bowl on the cover actually came out of our kitchen. And so he wrote me one day as we were putting together this cover, and he said, I was going to just, accept the soup and deal with the photo that you sent me. But what I really need is this format and this shape. If you wouldn't mind, that would really help me out. And I thought, okay. He's calling out one of my own analogies to me, which is the first time somebody's ever done that. That's the title. So that is how Don't Just Have the Soup was born.
I love that. And it's such a great title. Totally captivating. I want to let people know that if you want to find out more information about the book, you can go to thesoupbook.com. And that will take you where you need to go. Just don't do an HTTPS, do an HTTP. But thesoupbook.com should take you where you want to go. And while we're at it, we'll talk about Alan's website is peacefuldirection.com. What, as you've written the book and launched it, what were the valuable lessons that you learned there?
First and foremost, and this is something I was hoping for, I can still do big things. Yeah. So my day is divided into tiny, tiny little pieces, an hour here, hour and a half there, 20 minutes on a task there. To be able to have an objective, make a plan from start to finish, and actually carry it out and result in a new physical thing that took months to create was tremendously gratifying for me, in that I hoped I could still do it, and I demonstrated to myself that I could. Yeah. And I have not written anything that took months, since I was in school. So it's been that long. And even then, this was broken up into 52 tiny pieces that I was assembling bit by bit when I had time. Two is that people want to read the thing, which, is a nice surprise, but you never harbor that illusion as a self-published author. So that's been nice. And almost immediately, once it did become available and I posted it on LinkedIn, I started getting pictures from friends of them holding their copies in different cities around the world. And three is that, and this was not something I was anticipating at all, I was working in communications and marketing for 20 plus years before becoming a coach. I know a lot of people who work in a lot of different places, and the vast majority of them will never become coaching clients, because it's expensive and you have to be at the right point in your career and you have to find the right fit. And yet this book has given so many people who I know the ability to connect with my work at a much, more grounded level. Because lots of people spend $20 to buy a book all the time. They do it multiple times a year, in fact. And so hearing from them that this is something that moved them a little bit or gave them a little bit of an understanding or entertained them a little bit has been very gratifying and something that I didn't expect at all. So it's been great.
That's a wonderful story. I'm curious, how long did it take you to I'm assuming that you've written more than 52 blog posts.
Yeah. So is the question sort of from start to finish, how did the process unfold? How long did it take to do that?
I'm curious about that because you were saying, you've got 15 minutes here, an hour there, to do that with, and that is common to a lot of folks who work by themselves. Is that
yes.
You have to fill in the gaps. Sometimes
so I put myself on a
creative
schedule.
Projects.
Yeah,
Okay.
I put myself on a schedule, and I would say reasonably disciplined, but not completely in following that schedule. My practice of late has been that if a given task is going to take me more than 30 minutes, I schedule it.
Yeah.
And so I would schedule my writing in blocks of at least 90 minutes to sometimes up to 3 hours at a time. And all I did was just divide up the number of analogies I had left to write with the time that I had left before the deadline, and I cranked it out. So some weeks I would write 0 because I just had too much coaching or I was uninspired or it just didn't work for some reason.
Yeah.
And some weeks I would write 10. And so it was a pretty heavy summer in terms of the writing while my wife was, upstairs on break from school, furiously sketching out the illustrations on her iPad. I finished before she did because I had to get things off to an editor and, get things formatted properly to get the illustrations inserted. But right around the beginning of November is when both of us wrapped up our work. And I shared this, actually. I wrote a blog post this week about how the book came together. The act of causing the book to exist in reality is breathtakingly simple. You need 2 PDF files and a JPEG, about $100 and 24 to 48 hours, and that's it. It's like you flip a switch and then all of a sudden you see it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and independent booksellers around the world, which is pretty cool. But of course, it's all the thinking and the work that leads up to that flipping of the switch that takes the real time and energy.
Yeah. So all told, how long did that take you?
I would say in earnest, from really thinking that I had something here that I wanted to do in, say, late April, to digging in with an actual writing schedule and understanding what this was actually going to entail around May or so, to publication November 11th. So about 6 months all in, I would say.
Not bad at all. That's actually a pretty quick turnaround for a book.
Yes, and as I say in the introduction, my hat off to so many great authors who have inspired me through their work since I was a child, really. The folks who can take a story and spin it over these hundreds of pages in an amazing novel that will just take you away, or spend years conducting a research project to package it into a book form and share it with the masses when you're done. This is not that book.
Yeah.
I'm not capable or qualified of that sort of an effort at this point in my life. So what you have is a collection of stories that I've heard or told that can help us make a little bit more meaning out of the world.
I'm curious as to, are you already ready to write another one?
So the question of where's the audio version, or, are you turning it into a course or the next one? I'm thinking about all these things, and I'll share, I had more than 52 in my hands before the book actually got produced.
Yeah.
Some of them, I started writing them and they didn't make sense anymore. So they came off the list. It just, it wasn't worthwhile or didn't translate into the format. Others maybe didn't fit the categories, the 6 categories that I broke the book into. And others just kept coming after I had already sent the book to the publisher. So I'm sitting on probably a dozen extra that are workable at this point. It's early in the year. There might be a part 2 at some point down the line. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe I just fire them off as a series of blog posts that are a bonus to the book. But I didn't expect that Analogies would stop coming to me after I published, and that has definitely been the case.
There are a couple of things that I just want to kind of reflect back upon what you've said, and that is for anyone who wants to do this kind of a big project, there are a couple of things that Alan has mentioned that I think are really important to grab a hold of, and one of them is that you have to create a system for it. There just has to be you have to schedule the time, you have to make the commitment, and you have to follow through. It's not going to happen any other way. And the thing that I also loved about it is that, you realized that there were some times when you really had to devote not just 30 minutes here or 15 minutes there, but you had to devote 90 minutes to 3 hours of your time to do the work that needed to happen. So you made a priority of it, and to the exclusion of other things that you could have been doing. And I think that that's something that was really important to pick up on there as well.
No, I appreciate the reflection back. The other piece that I thought of just now is, of course, accountability, which is what we as coaches deliver to our clients every day.
Yeah.
On this one, yes, it was a self-published work, so I did not have a publisher, demanding copy by a certain date that we had agreed upon. And I engaged with my wife to do the illustrations. Yeah. So we were keeping each other on track in terms of our schedule. I had gotten an editor to commit to work with me and be ready to receive the manuscript on a date certain and turn it around by a certain date after that. So there were pieces in place and deadlines that weren't solely within my own making. And I think that helped drive the process along. Because after all, if I'm only accountable to myself, does it matter if the book is published November 11th or November 16th? Not really. But, it was a solo endeavor to some extent, in that I was sitting at my computer by myself writing out the analogies. And yet I have the voices of many of my clients in this book, fellow coaches, and I have the team that helped me put it together, without whom it wouldn't have been possible at all.
Yeah. Well, that's an inspiration to those of us who want to do big things.
Yes.
From the standpoint of someone who is your own company, you are it. You're the one guy who it all kind of rises and falls upon for your own business. What are the things that you just really enjoy about that life?
Many. And some I was anticipating before I made the change, and some I've discovered along the way.
Yeah.
One is there's something incredibly gratifying about every dollar that comes in being as a direct result of the efforts that I have undertaken. And I know that's not unique to coaching. I know that, people who work fixing things and making things, creating artwork, all of it is along the same lines, but it feels very honest to me. It feels very worthwhile. And at some point, maybe I will get to the stage in my practice where I need to hire a bookkeeper or something like that. But I actually enjoy doing my invoices because it's kind of my moment of gratitude. It's, I did this. This is mine. Also, I enjoy the flexibility of it. So I worked for other people for 2+ decades before coming out onto my own as a coach. And there is no one to ask for permission if I'd like to go to my daughter's cross-country meet in the middle of the afternoon. If I'm taking a couple of weeks vacation in the summer to travel with my family, that comes first. And my clients are always understanding of that sort of thing, but it's different from having to ask permission of an employer. I can put the work aside when I travel and I'm not working. So going away for the winter holidays, I have set up a system that the only place that I can access my work email and my files and my messaging is from my laptop computer in my home office. I don't carry my work email on my devices, and that's the first time I've been able to say that since there were devices. And it's really nice to have that separation, to have those boundaries. So I am working less than I typically did when I was in a full-time position working for others. That is by design. It is a tremendous privilege to be able to do that, and I'm grateful for it every single day. And it's amazing. So I know there is this notion that entrepreneurs are the only people who would put in 80 hours a week working for themselves to avoid working 40 for someone else. It doesn't have to be that way. If you're thoughtful about how you spend your time and your energy, and that has been a learning, because I didn't know what I was signing up for in that regard when I signed up for it. And I have found that while I'm comfortable by myself and while I'm home by myself with the dog most of the day, many days, there are others along the way who are fellow travelers, and I enjoy their company as well. So other coaches who are self-employed and I make it a practice of getting together, of collaborating on projects, of sharing advice and wisdom. And to me, that scratches the itch of having a community, of being on a team enough.
Yeah.
Versus, I have spent not a moment since November 2019 thinking about office politics, and I love it. And I talk to other people all day about theirs instead.
Yeah. Well, amen to all of that.
Preaching to the choir, right?
Oh yeah, man. And my guest for this episode has been Alan Heymann. You can find Alan at peacefuldirection.com. And you can also find out about his book at thesoupbook.com. Alan, this has been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Your insights have been really right on target for me, and so I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Franklin. It's been great to spend this time with you, and look forward to hearing what your listeners have to say about our conversation.
So if I showed up in D.C., where would we eat?
Outside someplace at this point, probably.
Yeah, probably, right.
Got a few haunts in D.C. and also up in Montgomery County where I live. A few of the standards, but we haven't spent any time inside a restaurant dining in quite a while.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of my old neighborhood of Tacoma Park, where there were some really lovely outdoor places to grab a bite.
Yeah. So one thing that just crosses my mind off the top of my head is there's an outfit called, I think it's Soul Food, but as in the capital of Korea.
Yeah.
Used to be a food truck, then it was in a gas station up here in Wheaton where we live, and now they've got an actual sit-down place in Tacoma. And then, of course, so we're a vegan family, and there's the vegan donut place where the line forms around the block, and they sell them until they're gone, and then they close. I think it's called Glory Donuts or something along those lines, and that's in Tacoma as well.
Well, I miss my old stomping ground, so it's good to have a reconnection with that.
For sure. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for listening to Your Own Best Company. If you enjoyed the show, would you do me a favor and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast host? If you really love it, leave me a review or share it with your circles. If you feel like your career is reaching a dead end, or you're feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction in your work right now, I help people discover their gifts and then find or create new opportunities that are the best fit for their talent, experience, and lifestyle. Email me at coaching@franklintaggart.com for more information. I also help people start, finish, and launch creative projects, and I offer an ongoing marketing mastermind for solopreneurs and freelancers. More information on these programs and services can be found at franklintaggart.com. Thanks again for spending this time with me.